So I'll be moderating from the background scenes, folks. I know you can't see me, but that's probably just as well. Because you've got a far better looking collection of... yeah, exactly. Well done, Samantha. She just mentioned that the spare seat was for the sixth sense. So I'd like to encourage any of you that have any questions for our assembled panel, either specifically related to any of their presentations or generally related to any of the concepts we discussed, to throw them out unashamedly. For those of you that are listening in remotely, I will be taking your questions and speaking them out loud to our panel. So without any further ado, let's hear from you. What questions do you have of these people? Thank you, Ben.
Brilliant. What are some of the ways that you can incentivise staff?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for the question, Ben. Look, what I would say is a common misconception and an observation from our short time in the corporate world is that many organisations are trying to incentivise in the wrong ways, and we're not actually asking our staff what it is that they want or need. We're making assumptions that are not founded in fact, and it is in turn resulting in a transient workforce, high turnover, and we're just missing the mark, but the answer is literally sitting in front of us. It's literally behind the person that you're trying to engage with. And I'd say people are incentivized by different things. Some are finance. Some people have a certain standard of living and they need money. There's no surprises there. But what about the mother that needs to come into work late and needs to leave early? And in order to do that, she's happy to work in an organisation that has a good positive culture, understands that level of flexibility, and that's enough for her to engage in that team for a very long time. What about the person who is focused on professionally developing themselves and they want to be a part of an organisation, and the choice to go one way or the other is determined by the one that will invest in their professional development, or put them on courses like this today, or engage them in communities where they can actually professionally develop themselves? What if it's about perks? Someone needs a vehicle, or someone needs, a salary sacrifice in order to have a certain standard of living, but they actually don't need a lot of, disposable income. Maybe it's a combination of any of the above. But what I would suggest is the answer is actually sitting in front of you most of the time, and we very rarely ask the right questions. And we, in the Eighth Mile Consulting, often engage with organisations that are in a state of flux, and they're experiencing all the frustrations and all the friction associated with high turnovers of their employees, and no one's ever actually asked them why. It seems like an opportunity to me.
Thanks, David. Thank you, Ben.
I kind of like to add to that. Of course, we've made lots of mistakes and we've tried to incentivise staff with payments. But at the end of the day, money has always been a hygiene factor. And it's kind of more about what you talked about in terms of what you can offer in the workplace. And for me, what I try and do with my team is tell them that I'm here to serve them. And that's my role, really, is to help support them and grow in the role that they want to do, and what do they want me to do. Because I blatantly say to them, your success is my success, so what do you need to do that? And recognition is a significant part of that, in terms of in front of the team or at an individual level, just saying, well, look, I really appreciate the work that you do. You do a great job, you really make a difference, you align to our values, and I really appreciate that. And we're kind of going through a bit of a challenging time at the moment in our business, and I kind of even dig down even deeper every day, just thanking my staff for what they do, showing the contribution that they make, and seeing where I can help support them.
Thanks, Tran. Elena.
Yeah, what would you each classify as the single defining leadership behaviour for yourself, and then what is it different for somebody that you're seeking to be led by?
They can't all be the same.
So the one thing that I think we've commented on a little bit, and we've brought to the front in a lot of our posts and our content when we engage with leaders both at strategic and operational level, is, and the one thing that we like to see is they exhibit this attitude of it's not about me. We spend a lot of time talking to leaders saying it's not about you. You know, you're worried about how you look, how you feel, how you need to professionally develop your leadership style, how you need to professionally develop your communication, but it's not about you. You're a leader. Your responsibilities and your service are to the people that you're leading. So the one defining characteristic and thing that I would put there is it's not about you. And if you can see that in a leader, hold on to them.
That's really good. So I was reflecting then on the values of our company, which are our values as well, and they're focused, open-mindedness, genuine and supportive. And you've taken supportive, so I'm going to take open-mindedness. And I think being open-minded and really listening to what people have to say before passing judgment or before even giving advice is key, because sometimes there are no right answers, and you just need to hear people out in order to get them to perhaps have the answers for themselves.
I think the one probably for me is probably what you talked about before, about intentions, or that you're here to do the right thing. I think if you can kind of show the team what your purpose is and why we're doing this stuff, and that you follow with your behaviour in the way in which you carry that through in the workforce, then people will back you to the hilt. They'll support you and follow behind. We've had somebody that's resigned from the role, and I just said to her, look, I still love you as a staff member. Could you just even work for me part-time? I don't care what it is, 2 hours a week, it doesn't matter. And she was prepared to do that because she valued that I led by my intentions, and that my intention was always good things for the team and for the staff themselves, and people resonate towards that. And I think maybe in the current, not in the current environment, but in the environment in general, there's a lot of insincerity or corporate kind of feeling around things, and it doesn't seem genuine. But if you're genuine in the way in which you approach things and you're open and honest with it, then I think people will follow you from a leadership perspective as well.
For myself personally, it's empathy. It's the one thing that I think I want to represent in leadership. I believe that using empathy, it works with leading your teams, but it also works with leading your clients. If you can understand your client, then you can meet their needs well. So having that empathy in a space for leading clients, having the empathy in a space for leading your people, but having empathy for yourself. You know, I mentioned about the imposter syndrome, the self-doubt, and if you're able to reflect that empathy to yourself, then you're able to move beyond those things and be the leader that you need to be for yourself as well as for others.
For me, it's service. It's service to your family, it's service to your team, and it's service to others. And service takes form in different ways in different places, and every context has its own relevance. But what I'd say is, if you're not running a lens of how can I provide service and relevance to others in this exact moment, then you have missed the mark as a leader.
Great question. Thank you, Alana. Thank you, panel. And I am going to lob in from the side, as I reserve the right to do so. For me, it's self-awareness, because having the ability to understand your own limitations as a leader then provides you the opportunity to surround yourself with people who bolster your areas of opportunity, and also provide us all with the important objectivity we need, as we don't always see the world through other people's eyes. So that's my two bob worth. Thank you. What other questions do you have, assembled audience? Thank you, John.
Funny you mentioned that, because I was going to ask about self-awareness.
Assuming you get to a point where you do become self-aware, which is great, how do you ensure that you remain self-aware? Because it's a constant, obviously. You have to, it's not, you don't just flick a switch and it's done. So what do you do specifically or generally to ensure that you're always self-aware?
I think you've got to put personal checks and balances in place. So having a set of defined values and ensuring that you act within those value sets is step one. And two is surrounding yourself with those people that tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. So you're building a support network and a series of checks and balances that keep you honest with yourself. Right? And they're the two things that I would offer to be able to maintain accountability to yourself, but also that self-awareness.
It's very much in that vein, but so I'm part of an advisory board essentially with other business owners who are also not in competing fields, and that's exactly what we do. We're putting out there what it is that we want to achieve, putting out there the things that we're doing, and then putting up a mirror to ourselves with their feedback and just being open and listening to what they do, to what they have to say. Aside from that, there's a bit of meditation, some float tanks. Don't know if I'm going to be doing too many of those, or I do believe they kill 99% of germs. For just some self-reflection time to actually, rather than necessarily having other people tell you, just to have a look at your own behaviours.
Yeah, going to skip that one?
I'm going to think.
Okay. Well, I like to reference what I said as well in if I ever feel like I'm the big fish in the little pond, then my pond probably is not able to teach me much more. So I've always got to be willing to push myself to jump into the bigger pond, and understand that when with self-awareness and self-reflection, there's points that you can come to a wall where you're going to be unconsciously incompetent. And so you need to be in those bigger ponds for those people who have been there before you, and they can tell you what things that you need to start being aware of so that you can gain that knowledge and then have new awareness on yourself to continue forever improving.
When you say self-awareness, I think honesty. And I break it into two parts. It's being honest with others and it's being honest with yourself. And being honest with yourself is a lot harder than being honest with other people. Would you not agree? Right. Well, touching on Jono's point, the easiest way to be honest with yourself is to surround yourself with people that provide objectivity. Using Peter Keith's metaphor before about, have you ever heard yourself on a voice recording and it sounds completely different to what you thought? Ask your mate or record yourself. So what I'd say is if you are genuinely on the pursuit of self-awareness, the easiest way to do it is provide yourself with an objective source to give you the information you don't necessarily want to know. But it will come. And with it comes clarity if you choose to accept it. But it's very difficult to achieve, but once you have achieved it, it's worth everything in the world to you.
Yeah, I think along those lines as well, you've got to kind of be open to it as well. So like any opportunity, anything happens, you've got to seek it out, look for people that can give you that feedback, and then probably be resilient enough to kind of take it on board, even if you don't like what's being said. And that's a self-reflection bit, I think, in terms of, and sometimes we all tend to be very harsh on ourselves, and I don't really think it's at times warranted. We're probably our own worst kind of enemy at times, and I just think we need to kind of cut ourselves some slack and realise that, we're not perfect, and nobody actually ever is, and everybody's kind of at the same level. A manager of mine taught me once. She said she was a senior executive team, and she was talking about the EXT, and she said, "You know what? They all put the undies on one leg at a time." So, we kind of need to self-level and realise that not to be so harsh on ourselves, but look for those opportunities to get the feedback.
Great. Thanks, John. Good question. Callum.
It's good to get the panel's view. I think in today's day and age, there's a lot of sort of macro things that are challenging for everyone, employees and leaders. As leaders, I was keen to sort of get your view on how could you pick up on employees, maybe mental well-being state, and at what stage do you sort of intervene on that?
I might jump. Yeah, it'll be simple.
We talked about sleep. I can't remember who talked about sleep, but we talk about sleep a lot at work, and I do check in about whether people are getting enough sleep, and that's a big one. I think it's a big indication of where they're at as a starting point, at least. And beyond that, I would say it's paying attention to little nuances, little changes that are maybe happening, and recognizing if their work's dropped off or if something's dropped off or their attitude seems off, it's possibly something bigger than what's in front of you.
One man's opinion. You have to invest your most important resource into knowing your people. Time. It is the one finite resource you have. The more time you invest, the more you know, the more you understand, and the more you can see the behaviours change. And if you're receptive to that, then you can see those changes and do something about it. On a practical level, ask. And don't just ask, how are you? Ask second, third, fourth, fifth, open questions, and get the answers that you want. You don't need to be saying, hey, you look upset, because you've already put a wall up. You're judging someone and you're telling them what they look like. And ask open questions and invest time.
Just to add to that, Callan, there are 4 preconditions for unresourceful behaviour, spelt out in an acronym called HALT. H stands for hungry, A stands for angry, L stands for lonely, and T stands for tired. So it's always a really useful strategy when you are checking in with your people to just have those 4 preconditions in your head. Because I happen to share my household with an extraordinary woman with red hair and green eyes, and she happens to do 2 of them in a combination she calls hangry. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with that precondition. So I know that a rational conversation at that stage is unresourceful. The most important priority is food. And yes, she's not in the room, so I can speak with complete impunity. Great question, thank you. What other questions do we have from the... Sorry, Rick.
The Queensland Government actually do sessions on it, on End Street, it's about $35 a session. And they go through mentally healthy workplaces and psychological safety and healing points and all that kind of stuff. So anybody can go and meet business can go and choose to do that. I think it's a really good resource. You're not going to learn the skills necessarily to have the conversation, which is a good watch-out.
Especially with candidates and stuff.
That one as well.
Yes.
Some of the guys will be familiar, we implemented a scale of 1 to 10 in our stand-up, and it was on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your wellbeing? And so you just go round and people just would have to answer honestly. You don't have to explain the details of it. It's just simply, I'm sitting about a 6 and I've been there for 2 weeks, or I'm a 3 and I've been there 20 minutes. You're like, all right, let's have a chat. Or it was the ability for the team to go, oh, this person's not well, let's hunker around them and give them some extra support. So it's a safe way for people to enter into the conversation as well.
Great, thanks, Alana. Other questions, please? Brett.
You were talking about succession and, having someone to take over or understudy your role. At what stage in your leadership would you suggest that comes in? As soon as you fill that role, a year into the role, time frame, sort of.
As a leader, as soon as you take over your position, you're preparing your handover. As soon as you are there, you're setting the conditions for someone to take over. Because you effectively, as a leader, you want to write yourself out of a job. All right. So as soon as you start setting the conditions for someone to come in and take over your place, because the person above you should be doing the exact same to you, and it should be a flow-on effect. And the easiest way, even if you're not confident in the position, the easiest way for you to become confident is to get to a point where you can teach. So I'd say straight away, as soon as you take over that position, you're setting the conditions for someone to take over, successfully take over.
Yes, Steve. On succession again, what would you do for that person? Like, would you try and direct them about how you do your job, or would you help them find themselves? What's your ideals of succession?
Anyone else? Very good. Again, that you answered your own question, Zen. What would you do? effectively to grow that person to a point they could take over your position. There's no point growing someone into you and to be you, because everyone brings different capabilities, standards, and a way of thinking. You don't want to push that out the way. You want to bring that individuality into the position. So you find how, if they want that position to start with, how would they do it? You can always ask the question and then find a way to grow their capabilities and what they're good at into being able to achieve the responsibilities or the roles of that position. Again, one man's opinion.
I'd say one way that I found very successful in developing people in succession behind us is get them to do the planning for the tasks that you are responsible for. So get them involved in the development of the strategy, get them involved in the development of the project, and although they might not have accountability or responsibility for its outcome, they've been involved in it and they've had a piece to play. And if even one or two of their ideas get onto the drawing board and into the delivery, then you've got them. They're part of the team. And, you know, if nothing else, they'll just get the confidence to be able to engage in like projects. So I think that's a really valuable and inexpensive way to get that followership and that succession, and get them thinking, if I was in that position, what would I do?
Great, thank you. We have a question from our non-present audience. This is a question from Pete. Question directed to you, Neil. Do you feel we are currently in a mid-cycle economic slowdown with a quick recovery out the other side, or end-cycle position with a far more detrimental lasting impact?
Thank you for thinking. Well, thank you. Was it Pete, you said?
Yeah, his name is Pete.
Pete, well, thank you for thinking that my opinion matters. Because part of my philosophy, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, is no forecasting. And the reality is that it doesn't matter what I think in this regard. I haven't studied the economics of where it is, and I could ask 50 economists the same question, and half of them will say one and half of them will say the other. And so I'd prefer to respond by saying, if you're asking the question because you're trying to make some decisions about your own personal affairs, is customize it to you. Understand what sort of risk you are willing to take, understand where you sit, and how much risk you're willing to take if you're wrong on that question, or where we sit on that scale. And if you're not confident, then seek advice and get somebody who is able to customize it for you so that it doesn't matter what the answer is to that question.
Thank you. Peter, I hope that answers your question.
It probably doesn't, but it does.
Okay. I have a question for the panel. What is the single discipline action that you think is the most important thing you do for you on a routine basis?
So when Pete has always asked me the question, who are you? The three things that, again, after working through a workshop on it, I'm a father, I'm a leader, and I'm a communicator. The one thing that I try to do, and I do, in one way, shape or form, is spend time with my son. And that is the one thing, if nothing else, I can do in a disciplined fashion, is spend time with him.
Yeah, I'm going to have a think.
That's a very good question. That's excellent. For me, I kind of think what I do to kind of get through things is I'm probably a bit more pragmatic about things, and I'm not so hard on myself. And coming back to what I said before, in time everything passes. So, you know, if things are kind of going crazy around me, I try and keep myself calm and think that I can manage through this situation. Who in the team can help me do this? Are there other ways of doing it? So I'd kind of seek advice. But every night I sleep well. I don't go to bed and worry about things, and I don't wake up in the middle of the night worrying about things. I guess as long as I know I'm, like when I went to school, as long as I know I'm doing the best thing I can do, that's about as much as I can kind of manage, really. and then the rest there's a plan in place, or things will sort themselves out.
Mine may come across a little bit morbid, but when I'm making my decisions, the discipline that I like to take is to ask myself, if I was on my deathbed right now, would this matter? And therefore, the decision I'm taking, so then that decides whether I'm going to weigh on it longer or just move forward. And if it is something that's going to matter, then what's something that I'm going to be able to die in peace with? What's a decision that if I make now, if it's one that matters, that when laying there, I'll be in peace. That's the discipline that I hold on myself.
For me, it's prioritisation. So what impact and effect are you going to achieve with the next action, and for what purpose? So that might be, my family. Am I going to stop work now? Am I going to go spend time with the kids? Which I often get wrong, and I work late and I make mistakes there, and I'm probably head nodding in the background. But I try and run a prioritisation. I try and go, I've got 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe 10 things to do. What things are going to bring that impact and effect? And I've found I've gotten better over time. I'm certainly not where I need to be, but over time I've gotten better, and that's allowed me to really knuckle down on those things that achieve a disproportionate effect to the energy that I put into them. And, that might look like I might be able to send, a LinkedIn message here, and that might be able to reach, 26,000 people, and I might have achieved service in that way for this day. But at the micro level, it might be I might turn the computer off and I go spend time with my family. What's going to have the highest impact and effect? What are my priorities in terms of family, friends, work, etc.? And sometimes they need to shift and change, but by and large, family wins each and every time. So that is really important to me, priority of effort. And I think it helps manage time, and it makes time manageable.
So I thought 2 daily disciplines that I do have is actually meditation, 10 minutes of just breathing and meditation, and just not trying to think of anything, actually, just trying to forget everything. And then the other is, and it's linked to what Dave said there, but it's more work related, which is to understand when I come in the morning, what is the most important thing to achieve today, and to do that first thing, to not leave it till the end of the day, because it doesn't get done. It's every day, what is the most important thing, and tackle it first.
Great, thank you. What other questions do we have from the audience? Okay, well, were you going to ask a question? Is it okay for the panel to ask each other questions? Okay, over to you lot.
It was about assisted sales. So how do you go about creating that culture of actually getting assisted salespeople assisting each other?
Okay, well, I can speak to a couple of examples there. When we have personal targets we had a target of 18. We needed to sell 18 vehicles, and we could sell across any range. So this will be specific, but it's an example. So when we were able to sell either a Honda or a Hyundai, and the client themselves may have been looking for that, what mattered most to the client was the better outcome was the Honda. My personal knowledge base was stronger in the Hyundai. So I would go to the Honda salesperson and say to them, if you help with this, because you've got a stronger knowledge base there, we will share this sale. So then it was a split commission rate. So then the client got the best outcome because they had 2 salespeople assisting them in that result. They got the knowledge that was necessary on the vehicle, so they didn't get me trying to guess my way through the answers. They had the salesperson with the best knowledge and the best position for that answer. And so then that commission got split because it was a shared duty that was delivered. And people, when it was difficult to hit target, it was easier to sell with 2 people. So you were actually spreading your capabilities across the team. So that's one example there. So allowing people to actually share a sale. Another was giving a team goal. So rather than just giving personal goals of 18, we had a team goal in Hyundai. So we had to have 35 for Hyundai. And so we would focus on what do we need to do today in order to achieve the 35, where are we at, how close are we, and how many calls, car test drives, everything do we need to do today to get that number as a team. So there would be a team reward if we got that. So we would reflect at the end of the day as well. How close were we to get to it? What do we need to do as a team to achieve it?
Thank you. Good question, Neil. I have a question for the panel as well, and this is a question that is not specifically related to leadership per se, but what if the person looking to engage your services is the issue? How do you deal with that?
With raw and uncomfortable honesty. It's the answer. I can elaborate all you want, but to tell that person that, and we've done it many times, have you ever considered that the problem is you?
And typically, have they responded to that?
Actually, quite positively, funny enough. And not all, but most, I would say, respond quite positively. And in fact, for the first time in their life, they have somebody they can actually trust, who's not telling them what they want to hear, is telling them something they need to hear. And most of the time, those are the people that engage us and we actually build really strong rapport and trust with. Most of our executive coaching people have come to us because they've either self-admitted that they have an issue, but for the ones that have kind of been sucked into the process, they've had that discussion with us or with someone else. And so, raw and uncomfortable honesty. What other answer is there?
Well, let's wait to hear. There could be 4 others.
Yeah. I do agree that
yes.
it's honesty. It is honesty. Though I have had some altering responses. They're not always happy to hear that. Sometimes I am honest with people about what it is that's going on. I think that you've got to be careful about when and where, and I think that is something that Jonathan also says in the many posts I've read that you guys share, is careful on where you give that information, who's around at the time. So is it relevant environmentally? Are they in a psychologically safe space to receive that information? And how are they feeling? Like what you said with the halt. If they're hungry or if they're tired, they're not going to receive that information well. So I first have to measure if it's an appropriate time to be sharing that with them. And if it's not, then we can progress with a different scenario. So we can say, okay, let's address what we're wanting to achieve. What does the current state look like? What is the desired state? And what are we got to move in the middle of the ground there? And let them tell me what's the problem. So instead of me having to tell them, if they're in one of those states where me telling them is just going to end up with a slap in the face, then we'll let them tell me what they believe the problem is until they are in a better situation to receive that information.
Great answer.
Thank you.
I kind of think it depends on what level you're dealing with at the business. If it's an operational kind of level, at times people within the business don't have the courage to have a conversation. And when you do have that conversation, you can put it in such a way that you're kind of saying, well, this is kind of what you say, but this is the behaviours that I seem to see exhibited. Are you aware there's a kind of disjunct between the two? And how do you perceive it? Because people, unless they're made aware of some sort, it's not necessarily their fault that they're doing the wrong thing. So we had a dental assistant that was 18, she's young, she's first time in the workplace, and she wasn't turning up on time. Her makeup wasn't good. She wasn't doing the right things. So I said to the team lead, I said, have you had a discussion with them? Did you have the courageous conversation? But do it in a nice, supportive way. So she had this conversation with her and just said, look, do you know that these are the things I've observed? Are you aware of this? As soon as it moved from how I like to describe a subconscious to consciousness for her, and that was our duty to do that. Now she's excellent. She wants to do all these things. But previously they would have just fired her and said, oh, you're no good and off. But I feel kind of proud that I had the courage to say it to my supervisor, who then had the courage to say it to this person who's now doing really well. So I think it's all horses for courses, but I think if you're doing it from a good place, your intentions are good and you have not driving another agenda, well, I think that's probably all you can expect to do.
So specifically with regards to clients, I agree. We give full, frank and fearless advice, of course, in the nicest possible way. That doesn't offend necessarily. But one thing that I think I have an advantage is we create a strategic cash flow plan for a client, and we can talk to the plan. So we can say, well, the plan says this, but we're not. And so all the input numbers don't lie. And so we know exactly where we should be on that plan. And when there's only two people involved, client and us, and the plan, and we've delivered on our side, it becomes self-evident where the issue is. But we do it in a nice way in talking about what are the things that we can control? What are the things that we can focus on here? And what are the behaviors that we can change? And so rather talking, saying directly to them that they're the problem, we talk about there's a problem and together collectively try and solve the problem, even though it is obvious it's them.
Obviously, I'm going to say that with uncomfortable honesty because we've built a reputation on it. Another part of it that I'd add is you need to identify whether you want that client. They might be the problem, but the problems that the client is bringing to you might be them, but they may also be values-based. And if you don't share the same value set, then chances are you might want to rethink working with them at all. If their actions contravene your values, I would rethink about whether you want to work with the client at all, depending if that's the problem. But work to understand the problem and then give that completely honest feedback.
Great, thank you, panel. Peter's prolific, our listener. He's got another question. And it's not me, in case any of you are wondering.
It's the same question, mate.
The question is this. Peter has said that neutral thinking is getting spoken about these days in terms of mindset more regularly. Neutral thinking. His question is, what is the view on this type of mindset versus a positive mindset that is predominantly encouraged for obvious reasons? I'd like to respond to that first, if I may. So Pete, in terms of the way the science works, language has a direct link on chemical production via the endocrine system, as we've already discussed. So in the 60s and 70s, if you were alive at that stage, as I was, a lot of the messaging that was coming out into business was to think and say positive things and you'll lead a better life. And what it required was a leap of faith. The science has now caught up with the thinking, and because we now have empirical evidence linking language to the endocrine system, then understand that everything you think and everything you say will have a chemical output. And you do not have conscious control over this. It is all driven by the subconscious brain. So in the earlier example I mentioned, asking someone how they're going, you could receive a number of responses, but understand that the response of not bad is producing a particular chemical array, as opposed to the response of exceptional, which is producing a different chemical array. So whilst it is not yet socially acceptable for us to be perceived as being high on life or being upbeat, it's not necessarily a view that's supported in this country. I would encourage you to think positively at all times, because the choice is yours. You can think positively and know you're producing positive chemicals, or you can think neutrally and be beige. One man's opinion. Panel, anything else?
I've spent a lot of time thinking and reading on this neutrality of things are not good or bad, not labelling them as one or the other. Obviously, in a commercial world, that's a lot more difficult to do. But I believe where you can change that mindset and work with that mindset is in whether you're applying it to the outcome and the objectives that you're trying to achieve. And if you're attaching to those outcomes and objectives and those being good or bad, that's where you have that turbulence, much like the graph that Neil showed. If we attached that it was good or bad in the actual results on the graph, then there's turbulence, and then your feelings can sway between those. Where if you move it to what you were saying, Peter, to your identity and the situation being an opportunity to live to your identity and to live to those values. It doesn't matter what the situation is, whether you apply good or bad. And so then that's where the neutrality comes in, to not apply whether it is good or bad, but just see it as an opportunity to live to your values. I find that is the way that I've been working through the challenges that I face, even though that using the word challenge is technically saying that it's a bad skew. I'm still a work in progress. But that's my answer for you, Peter.
Yeah, well done. Thank you, Sam. Anyone else on the panel?
So, in the same thing is that I think it comes back from being a leader in position, and it's a question. Neutrality is good and it works well. It's a balanced approach to things, but the times that you need to have a conversation as a leader with most people aren't a neutral position. It's never neutral. You generally don't want to talk to them if it's neutral because they're doing their job okay. So how would anyone from the panel or the panel themselves see reading the room, if you will, on when is the time to be neutral and the time that you just can't be neutral? I mean, it's not an option of being society saying, okay, everyone be neutral.
Thanks, Ben. I would argue that it's actually really challenging for any of us to be neutral about anything because of the fact that we all have both conscious and subconscious biases and filters. Neutrality of thinking actually relates more to a concept that we in the 8th Mile have continued to focus on, which is rather than saying everything's neutral, we say everything is contextual. So equally, you can, in context, things can be good or bad, right or wrong. But if you understand the context, then that's a better way to manage neutrality than to simply be neutral, per se. So I'm challenging the labelling of the actual term to say that I don't think it's about simple neutrality of thinking. I think it's about being discerning and understanding the context.
Oh, that's what I was looking for.
One thing I think of with neutral, I'm a girl, I drive a auto car and I can't reverse park, but I always think of neutral on the vehicle, and you see like people are just sitting there and then they're ready to go. So it's more of a position of I'm ready and then I'll take action as opposed to what the action is. Makes sense?
A pause before you act.
Yeah, it's the pause, it's the waiting, it's the just being in the sideline, in position, ready to go, rather than what you're actually doing in the situation to move you forward.
Great question, Pete. That stimulated a lot of discussion. Have you got any others for us? Whilst we're waiting for Pete to craft another question. Hang on, which me is going to ask the question now? So what other questions do we have from the audience or the panel? Or
Squirrely one, and it's around like the words, and then back to language, accountability versus responsibility. And they're often used interchangeably, but they're very different things. And I guess I'm of the mind that you can't impose accountability, you can only take it. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that, and particularly around the military as well. I think the military do it exceptionally well, and it's that taking accountability for things. I don't see that as much in the business world.
I've always thought of it I've tried to simplify it in my mind that a responsible person is the builder, and the accountable person is the overseer. And the accountable person, ultimately, the buck stops with them, and they have to have the relationship with the responsible person to build it. So how that might look in practical terms is a PM working to a executive. The accountable person would be the executive. The responsible person is the builder, is the PM.
But taking it out of a project perspective and into the world.
So let's turn it into our company as an example. So Sam is our very capable marketing manager. If, per se, she decided to go rogue and create some crazy messaging and do a Trump Twitter style and just go rogue, ultimately Jonathan and myself would be accountable for that. She would be responsible for her actions, but we would be accountable as the overseer. And so I see that Jono and I, in that context, have accountability for the entire business, but people have to be responsible for their actions.
But I guess the gist of what I'm saying is you take accountability, Sam can't impose the accountability on you, as an example.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes, it has to be actively sought.
Yeah. So how do you, in the commercial space, how is that done? Like, how do you build more people who want to take accountability?
Well, I think I'd answer by going like this. What is it about these acts and these behaviours that people are avoiding? Why are we worried about things going wrong? Why are we worried about reporting it at all? And I say, the trickle feed of that, the logical progression is we're talking about different types of cultures. We've got cultures that accept accountability and responsibility in everything that they do, and we have ones that are not. And I'd say the ones that are not are probably the vast majority at the moment, and that's the battle we're trying to fight for. And the mechanism that we use, or the weapon that we use to do it, is raw honesty on our own behalf. And in fact, today is testament to that. We're trying to show what it looks like to be accountable for your own actions. It's okay that you're doing the wrong thing. In fact, it's great that you have identified that something went wrong, because now we're in the best position to ever fix it. So, our brand is built on this model of accountability and responsibility, and actively, look behind me, the value is accountability, and the action to that is actively seeking responsibility. And it's that interrelationship. It's okay for things to go wrong. It's not okay to not accept responsibility for them. That's my perspective.
I have one that I think would maybe contribute to that. I think that's something that you do very well with this business, and it also speaks to what Peter was talking about with the sense of identity and how you link your sense of identity to your values. What Dave and Jonathan have done very well with this business is they've built where they say they are good people helping good people. What they attract then is people who see themselves as good people. And when you are wanting to encourage accountability, and this is something that I ask with my son, and I know Rita asks with her daughter, is what kind of person do you want to be? And when you ask, are you the kind of person who are nice with your friends? Of our 4-year-old, they get it. And if a 4-year-old can get it, any of your employees can get it. What kind of person do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be? And are you being that kind of person in taking this action? If you're linking it back to their identity, that's where I think you'll have more people taking accountability. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's the military does it well, so it's that what can we learn from the
just
military?
from a corporate perspective is that when people are coming to a business, talks that Jonathan said earlier about that as soon as you become a leader, you're training the next person to become a leader. What you're trying to develop within that is you're trying to create them for an appetite for responsibility. But you've got to teach them how to become accountable. So that's what leadership is. Leadership is being accountable. Being responsible for something is something that everyone aspires to. I want my boss's job, I want my boss's job. But that doesn't mean you're entitled to it yet. So you've got to work to be gained. You've got to work with them as a leader and be a leader yourself to teach them that, okay, responsibility is good, but it also comes with accountability. And that's probably the biggest thing. And that's my military corporate crossover there.
For many people stepping into a leadership position for the first time, and my first leadership opportunity was an abject disaster. I was put in charge of a team of 12 people who 9 months later every single individual went to my boss and said, get rid of him or we're all leaving. So it was a stark lesson. So whether or not you actually hire your people or whether or not you inherit your people, the simple filter for all behaviours I like to push things through are around 3 things: competence, confidence, and attitude. So how we prepare people for responsibility is obviously by supporting them around their competence. Can they actually do the job? Have we hired the right skills? Can they do it? Have we trained them well? then confidence is the other thing, because in working with salespeople for many, many years, what often appears as a competence issue was in fact a confidence issue. And yet if the leader had had the opportunity to pull the trigger, they would have pulled the trigger. So defining the distinction between those two things assists. If it turns out to be an attitude problem, then I'm from the school of be slow to hire and quick to fire, because there's not much you can do with attitude. I always recommend people hire for it. And whether or not you've, if you have the opportunity to build a team yourself, then you've got a greater chance of having that success. But if you inherit stuff, then that's a lot tougher.
In regards to the military context, the best leader relationships that I've been involved in are under those leaders that actively encourage their team to find opportunities and gaps, whilst concurrently accepting the risk if it goes wrong. Because ultimately we're talking about risk and opportunity here. Because what that encourages is a really fast and agile moving team with really quick decisions, and everyone knows that they're protected and they feel that their back is covered, so they run even faster. They don't have to worry about what's going on behind them because they're just moving forward. And they've got a leader that absorbs the friction over the top of that and allows them to stay focused on the task. And if it all goes wrong, and sometimes it does, the buck stops with them. And they go, this was my decision. Yes, they did the actions, but I did the actions because I was overseeing them. And I think that ability to absorb the risk if it goes wrong is how you build that responsibility and accountability in a culture. And I've never seen it achieved any other way, personally.
I guess one of the tools that I've seen you guys use and I've seen in other worlds is the after-action reports. Mm-hmm. And so that ability to actually immediately in the cold light of day afterwards go, all right, we stuffed up here, this is what happened, here's how I take accountability and what I do differently. I think that's a sort of a good practice that comes from the military.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, Jono and I on a multiple times a day will chip each other behind, in the right environment, in the right way, and we'll be correcting ourselves as a team. We'll be like, you missed the mark here. You need to bring in back here, or just this was an observation you just didn't see, or you didn't have scope to see. And we're self-correcting as fast as we're making mistakes, because we're doing it from an angle of love. We actually give each other bad news because we respect each other so much that the idea of them not having that information in order to be able to protect themselves and our reputation is far worse than telling them the bad information in the first place. And so for us, we're constantly trying to protect each other by giving each other the bad news as quickly as it's coming in.
Anyone else want to respond to that from the panel? Because we've got another question from Pete. He had communicated to me that he was done. But I said, no, don't stop now. And he's risen to the challenge. So this is a question specifically targeted to you, Dave and Jono. What specific mechanisms do you employ to be able to emphasise with others in the civilian world, given that nothing we ever talk about is life or death?
I said it before, you need to invest the time in understanding the perspective. Dave and I have a different perspective on certain issues, so in our brains we prioritise according to that. So, as an example, if you've got a shower that doesn't have fast flowing running water, that's a big issue for you. You think that's a massive issue. When you've gone without running water for 6 weeks, then the water pressure means absolutely nothing when you get it. But so we try and take our perspective out of the picture for a brief period to understand what that issue means to the person who's giving it to. And then you try and empathise with that, like what Sam was saying before. Try and empathise from that perspective to see how important is this to that person and why. And then how do we fix that, or how do we look at it? So trying to put yourself in someone else's brain space and look at their perspective, because, if you're 2 weeks out of somewhere like Afghanistan and someone starts talking to you about problems, you look at them as if, what are you talking to me about? That is not a problem. It's one of the key frictions we have when we come back from overseas.
Yeah, and I think that's the question that Pete was asking. I paraphrased it, so let me ask it specifically. So how do you take a non-military problem and resist that instantaneous reaction of, well, compared to what? That's nothing, and still be respectful and available to support them with what might be a really minor issue, but for them is a huge issue. How do you do that?
A fight for context. It's all about context, and we've touched it as a guiding theme throughout this whole day, is context. You know, what one person does in the absence of information and looked at from the outside in compared to what another person does will get critiqued in very, very different ways. You know, all you got to do is look at the media and they'll pick an angle and then they'll run with it because they lack context. And then everyone rallies behind that message and then the damage is done and it's unstoppable. So what I'd say is we really do spend a lot of time to try and understand for this person, what is it that's influencing their world right now and why is it having this effect? What I'd also say is, you know, I look at the coronavirus. They put the military thing to the side, all right? The coronavirus now has been a mechanism now for the first time where we're going to actually have to trust our teams. And that's got nothing to do with the military. But for the first time, our societies across the Western world and other are getting pressure tested in a way they've never been. So all this theory and academia that we've had around building teams and managing our staff and whatnot is now getting pushed, as it would in the military, into a pressure test. And how are we coping? Some companies are doing well, some are not. Some are just absolutely lost the plot. In areas in certain society, we just lost the plot. So I say to you, you don't need to worry about military analogies. That's what we've got because we've just got time in that space. But they're all around you. Right now, we're in one. The fact we're live streaming is 1/8 miles last-minute adjustment to suit a changing environment around it. So we are, you know, there's pressure pots all across the world. Go put your team in them and see what happens. But believe it or not, we're actually in one right now. So context is everything. And to answer your question, the military analogy is irrelevant. It's just our background. It helps us look at things through a lens in a slightly different way. But it doesn't take away the meaning from any of those people, like more than anything else.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Pete's also said thanks. No, he's
there's a real Pete there.
There is a real Pete. Thank you, Samantha. It's not just me. So what final questions? I'm conscious of time. We are getting to the point where we probably need to start to wrap this session up. What final questions do we have for the panel? Well, if there are no final questions, I think we're going to call this and wrap the day. We're going to conclude with a little session that I'm going to run. It won't be more than 10 minutes. But it's certainly a way for us to close out the day and demonstrate our appreciation for you. So panellists, thank you very much.